Okay, so we're recording now. I'm recording. This is the demo for February 22nd. Nobody showed up, so I'm just going to start the demo. I downloaded an image of Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis, and I decided I would just do that for the demo. This is a demo for the self-portrait that you have due on Wednesday, I believe it is. So in a couple of days. And the assignment is about creating value using line work. So you're not going to do shading or really fast lines back and forth. That's not really deliberate line work. It asks for deliberate line work. So I'm going to do a quick demo showing you how to do what I'm asking you to do. And there's like a lot of different ways to do it because you can create lines and do a lot of different things, but I'm just going to show you some examples of what you can do. I think I'm going to divide the page in half. I'll do one half in pencil and I'll do the other half in ink since you have a choice of doing it in ink or graphite. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. So here we have the drawing. I'm going to move this to that side. I need a ruler to divide it. I chose this image because I like the dots on it. It gives me some pattern already, and I can embellish that pattern as I'm doing the line work. So the assignment is to stay with the values that you have. You know, I didn't divide her face here, so maybe I'll erase that. No, it doesn't matter. I'll just do it this way. So I'm going to do this side in graphite and this side in ink. So here, if I look at this, there's a lot of lighter values in these circles that are different dots. The darkest value is the hair and here. So I'm going to create line work for the hair, and I'll start out by doing that. So I'm going to use a heavier pencil, and I'm always going to test out what I'm going to do first. So if I created lines like this, they suggest hair, but they're still individual deliberate lines. So I think once I do that, I could come back and give it some more depth by putting in thinner lines in between there if I wanted the value to be darker in areas. So remember, this is not a drawing that you're trying to make it look realistic. You're using patterns and line work to make values. So I'm going to go ahead and get started on here. Using deliberate line work. And this is this thick crayon type graphite, so it's making really thick lines, which works for this because this is the dark value. So thick, denser lines will work for this. And So I think I'm gonna leave it like that. You can see that you have to be careful because you can smudge graphite. It moves pretty easily on your paper. Okay, and I did it on this piece of paper because I'm using ink, and that's why I'm using the watercolor paper to do this. You don't have to do it on watercolor paper if you're doing it in graphite. But if you're gonna use the ink, you should do it on the watercolor paper. Okay, so this is almost still white, but in order for that to be white, this background needs to have a little bit of a tone. So I'm going to use the 2B pencil and put some pattern here. It's darker in this corner and it's light here, but it's the background, and I'm just going to sort of take this same tone and take it all the way down. So I'm going to create that by just doing, I think my head's probably going to be in the way. Lines. Oh, that's the white of the scarf that is still. Okay, so this scarf comes down and there's still some white here, edge of the scarf, and that's very white as well, corner of it. And it's in here that I'm going to put my pattern. So I'm just going to do squiggly line. And it's a little darker up there, and I'm getting a lot lighter here. So it's just kind of giving it a little bit of tone. So you can see each of the line here, because of the watercolor paper, the lines aren't as distinguished. I'm going to erase that and try doing that part over. So that you can still see the individual lines. Okay, so this part is white, but it does have some shadow here, but not very dark. So I'm going to do some small lines that kind of just give that indication of a shadow there. And also the same thing is happening here, but it's not as, it's a little darker and wider. So I'm going to do some X's here. And I'm still using really light pressure with the 2B pencil because I don't want it to be too dark. And there's this white trim here. So let's give this line, let's put some lines in here to give it this edge. I'm going to switch to just short lines. Indicating where the colored edge starts on the scarf. And because the neck is not as dark, but it does have some value, I need to put something in here. So for there, maybe I'll just put circles. Or I think circles, because if I put lines, I already have these lines for the hair. Or maybe I'm just going to do some light cross hatching, or just X's that end up being a little bit of an irregular type of cross hatching. So you can see that I'm not doing any shading, I'm just using line work. This is her neck, has some darker value on it because it's in shadow, but it's not as dark as the hair. Okay, so this is also her skin, and this is actually about the same. And the background. So in order to kind of give us an edge, I might put in some more lines here, separate from the background. And her blouse is very dark, so I'm going to use the 6B pencil. It doesn't have quite, it's going to be dark, but I want it to be thin, so I'm going to sharpen it. If you don't have a sharpener, you can just use your X-Acto knife. It's important to keep your pencil sharp to be in control of the mark making that you're making. So for here, I'm just going to do very deliberate dark lines that are pretty close to each other. So in doing this, it's going to help you to be in control of line work, whether you're doing it in graphite or ink. I can tell you that it would be a little bit more difficult to do it in the ink, especially if you don't have something like a fountain pen or micron pens that you can use. But you can't do the entire assignment using micron pens unless you have a set of micron pens that do gray values, because micron pens are all one color. They're black usually. So in order to get different values of line in your ink, you're going to have to use your dip pen and dilute your ink. And if you feel like you've got this, you can always fast forward to the second part where I'm going to do a little bit on the leaves. Okay, so this part is going to stay the whitest. I'm going to leave that the white of the page. This is going to be, this has a little bit of, tiny bit of value in it. Actually, this should be the background. That's this part. Here is this part. So I'm going to erase some of this and extend that up. And I use this pencil. I should sharpen it. So graphite work does take a good amount of sharpening to keep your pencil sharp. Okay, so a close-up of what that looks like. And I'm going to just do a little bit on here and then I'm going to switch to the ink. So here, the dots are light. So when I do the dots, I would probably do something like for the medium dots, use a light pencil and maybe do some cross hatching in there. Or maybe I don't really like that because I don't know, I just don't like it. So maybe instead what I'll do is take that dot and do concentric circles in it. And that's a darker one. So I'm going to make this darker. These can get busy, that's okay. Don't be harsh on yourself if you think it's not coming out too great. Remember that you're learning. This is a foundation course. This one is the same darkness, so I'm going to do about the same thing. And then like this lighter dot, I can do thinner line, but do the same thing. So I would just keep doing that in the dots. The background is darker, so I may want to lighten those. And the way that I can lighten those is I can take my kneadable eraser and just push down and see how that lightened. I'm going to do it again. I can see the oil on my hands are smearing the graphite right there. That's better. That's more of the lightness that I wanted. And I might lighten that up a little bit. So I'll just have to really not bear down so hard with the pencil to get that. And the reason that I wanted that lighter was because this background of the scarf is the darkest part. So for there, I think I'm just going to do something similar to that, but I'll practice first. If I use a smaller pencil, even though it's a 2B, I can still go pretty dark with it, and it'll be easier to keep this thin. So I'm going to start to just put into the background. And I'm not going to keep going in the same direction. I'm going to just let it go in different directions, filling in that background. Oh, went into the ink side. I went ahead and drew the image in before I started so that I could spend the time actually working on doing the patterns, the values. And I could even leave some of these white if I wanted to, but I think it would take away from the fact that this is the whitest highlight spot. I like to keep a eraser at the end of my pencil because I tend to smear and smudge. And this is not quite as dark. This is much lighter. This is the lightest area. So I'm going to put a very light value on here, that strip. I'm going to do that just by, I think I'm going to just do some letters. Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis, I'm going to do J-K-O. 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 And I think that is even like a little too dark. Lighten it. So I'm going to lighten that now using the kneadable eraser. And I guess if you don't know what a kneadable eraser is, it's in your kit. It came as a little square piece of putty, and you take it out of the plastic and you just sort of can knead it into the shape that you want to pull graphite out with. And it's really not the same as this type of eraser that you do this with. This is just for pulling up. It works better that way. And this is light. One side darkened in this would, you would see the differentiation. So I'm going to go ahead and do a little bit of the black, the dark part of the scarf that would be right next to this. And then I'm going to move on to the ink so that I can show anybody who's interested in doing the ink a few tips. But my head's not in front of this. If somebody joins, I should hear a beep. If you joined and I've ignored you, just say something. But I don't think there's anybody joining me. So you can begin to get the idea of what is expected. And I'm going to come and do a little bit more embellishment on the hair by taking a thin pencil and adding a few more lines. I'm bearing down pretty hard, But I'm using this 2B pencil because it's giving me thinner dark lines. Okay, so that's that graphite side. For the ink side, I'm going to use, I just have, this is my fountain pen ink. It's permanent ink, so it's just a different brand, but it's the same, basically India ink. And I have these pens. I haven't tried this one. This one is pretty broad. This one's pretty fine. So I recommend before you start that you take a piece of scrap paper and play with your ink pen to practice line work. So if I wanted to do circles, I could do that. Kind of seeing how long I can go without having to dip my pen. And you can see that the value gets lighter as my pen loses its ink. But you don't have to rely on that. It's over there already. I am going to get a dropper. So I have this for mixing my ink. Put that here so you can see it. I don't know if I can get this in the picture, but. So everything that I'm going to do, I'm going to try on here first. So there's more hair here. I've already done the hair in this manner, so I think I'm going to do this hair in the same manner to be consistent. And there's this hair as well. I didn't do it on that side, but I'll do it on this side. So I think what I'm going to do here is test out the fatter pen that I carved that I haven't used yet. See what kind of lines I can get with that. Well, I can start out with the, so I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to put down a thick line here and bring it across, and a thick line here and bring it across that way. So I think I'll go to the right first. So I'm going to put some sort of heavy ink there, and then follow the hairline. Do the same thing over here. Well, and more than I was trying to deposit, but that's okay. And I'll start moving this over this way. Every time I dip my pen, I test it on the paper, test paper, before I put it down on my sheet. So I'm going to put some extra lines in here. Start coming out this way here. Oh, I went past the halfway point mark. You won't have to worry about that because you'll be doing yours all in one medium. So I think that's fine for the hairline on the top. Going to work on this hairline. I guess I don't have to follow the pattern I did on the other side because it's a different medium. You'll just be using one medium. So I think I'm going to just sort of follow the sweeps of these strands of hair. And since I know that my line is kind of thicker at the top, when I first start, that's why I'm starting at the top, so that as it comes down, it's the thinner line. There's a few strands there. So that's the hair in ink. I think the hardest part in ink would be like the mouth and the nose because they're so subtle. So I think I'm going to work on those. And the way that I would do that is, remember that for this assignment, you need some water. I keep jars of water around. So I'm going to take some water. If you have a dropper, it's handy. If not, you can just pour some off. And I'm going to use my thinner pen now and just dab some ink in there. And let's see what kind of value that gives me. Make sure you can see. Still pretty dark. So what I'm going to do now is take more water. And you always want to add ink to the water for dilutions. You don't want to try to add water to the ink because the ink is really dark and you'll have to have a lot of water and you'll have way too much medium than you really need. So instead of dipping in here now, because that's non-diluted ink, I'm going to use this diluted ink and put some in here. to get a much lighter value. And I think I might just scoop some over. And now I'll test this value. And it might take a minute to actually get that value because I might still have ink of the deeper value. So you can barely see this, but you can still see it. It's going to create some lines. So I'm going to work on developing some shadow that is on her nose here. So what am I going to do? Maybe just some little lines, the same way that I did here. So that's what I'll do. Very light lines, just to create some value in there. And I think on this side too, I can use this darker. So I need to lighten that again. See what this is like. That's too dark. So I'm going to get some of the ink off of this one. I think it's the sharper point. I'm also going to have, you also might want to have just a rag around. So I think I could just add more water to this one. Yes, and that's very light. That will work. And I have it in pencil, but I'm going to erase that. And create my value here with some lines. And that's all I'm going to do there. And then there's some more lines here. And I'll just put some very light here. Shadow area here. Might be getting too dark. So I'm not gonna mess with that anymore. I'm just gonna leave that be, although I think that there's a little bit more thickness to the shadow over here. And the eyebrows are very dark. So I think I can go to this. And it probably is dark as the hair, so I'm going to get back into the ink bottle. those I'm just going to do as short lines. I don't want to fill it in because I want to maintain my deliberate line work. I went over the edge again, that's okay. So the other eyebrow. I want to see how I'm doing on time. Oh, it's 1:43 already. So I'm not going to really do much more on here. I'll do the eyelid, the eye, so that you can sort of see how I'm going to deal with that, because that's also a dark area. I'm going to make those 2 dots where there's highlights, and then in the rest of it, I'm going to do some line work. Sort of cross hatching. And you kind of get the idea. You want to make sure that you use some diluted inks so that everything's not black. All right, I'm going to move on to the leaf because that's going to be due on Saturday. So I have a drawing here I did of a leaf. This is my leaf here. So this is the watercolor paper, so that I'll do the ink, the graphite one. You would do using line work and then using the values, the way that you created value without line work. So the first drawing, you're only using line. On this drawing, you're going to use line and some value from the exercises that you did on creating value. So remember those exercises for the ink and the graphite. So this is watercolor paper, so I'm going to go ahead and do this in ink. And I'm going to, I think some of the darkest areas are right next to the veining on here. So I might go and start to establish the lines of those veins. So I'm not going to do the outside right now. Here's my, I don't want to do it totally dark. So maybe some dilution in here. Maybe a little lighter. Still quite dark. It's okay, Sarge. Okay, that's good. Going to, I kind of pre-drew some of this so that so if you in ink, you might want to first start, just a minute. I'm doing a video. do your line work. To define some of the veining. Actually, there's more that goes here. This is the main vein right here. And these are secondary veins. And these kind of taper off here and join with the veining that comes from here. These end pretty small. And here, there's veins that come out this way. And there's you don't have to include every single bit, but you want to try to make sure that you don't just make it up and you try to follow what's actually in the leaf. And I might darken this. Some of these. Well, I guess I can darken it with the values with the brush. So I'm going to kind of establish the outer edge of this leaf. And I don't want to feel like I have to have a consistent thickness and value to the line as it goes around. So I'm going to let the thickness of the line change as well as the values, which is mostly going to be determined by every time I dip my pen, it's going to be a little darker and thicker. And you can still see some of my graphite line underneath that. That doesn't matter because what I can do is once I'm done with the ink, the entire ink drawing, then you can just erase the graphite from underneath and it won't disturb the ink once the ink is dry. So some of these start to join into each other just by touching. And then this out all the way to that. Yep. There's lines that come out. Not looking that great, but it's a matter of getting in the rest of the vein. So I'm using this ink pen, but if you have micron pens, Sharpies, and the microns come in different sizes, but they're always black. So this is an 08. This is a pretty fat one. I could come in and give this more depth. So you can have control of where you want really black line. And some areas you want to be lighter. So you can choose how you're doing it. You would continue to do the whole leaf. As it starts to develop, it would look more like a leaf. You don't have to do this intensive veining all over it, but in some areas you do want to do that. But you're also going to have to, once you let this all dry, you're going to put in some values using your brush. So you've used the brush before. This is similar to your brush. It's a little different, but it gives you an idea. So if I put water over this right now, it's probably not dry and it would bleed. So what I'm going to do, and then see right here, like maybe if you didn't like that you have that much ink on there, you could take some off by taking a dry brush and trying to just blot it up if you wanted it to dry faster and not be so dark. So now what I'm going to do is I can see here where I have some of these lines drawn for the veining coming out. So if I look at this leaf, I can see that where it bends, there's shadows. So I can show you how to put in a few of those shadows. You always want to test on paper, so that's pretty light value, but I could get an even lighter value to start with. So I can say that I'm just going to do this section of the leaf. Let's say that this, and right now I just have water on my brush, although you can see some value, it's just sort of dirty water from my water jar. So what I'm doing is I'm putting down and wetting so that I'll have soft edges. So now if I take some of my ink, I'm going to test that first. I bet it might be too light. So if I have that and I put some of this, I'm going to get some value. So that's good. So I'm going to put some values in here, in here, in here, and in here. So these are darker values, but not terribly dark. And there's like some value here. And then here. And ideally you would want to let that dry. Pushing the clock. It's already 2 o'clock, so my session is ended, but I'm going to go ahead and do a little bit more on this. I'm going to pull up some of this moisture so that I can put more ink down. So there was a bead of water there. It's gone now. And I do have, so you can see how I'm beginning to develop value. You don't want to just try to put it all down at once. You can build it. So this is darker. I could put in some value. And be in control of where it goes. And before it dries, you can lift it. Once it dries, it's permanent. But you can see that you can start to get some. So if I took my brush, wiped it off, cleaned it in some water, I could come back and really take out some of the ink I dropped in. And you can get even darker values by let it dry or by adding more ink while it's wet. So here's some really dry ink, and you can see what will happen if I put that in. So that starts. And you can control where the water goes by not putting water everywhere. I put water everywhere here. But maybe I wanted to accentuate these shadows, and you can do that. So if you can imagine that this is going to be overlaid on this, I couldn't overlay it right now because this is still wet a little bit. That you really begin to develop the form of the leaf. And that's too dark. I don't really like that, but that's not a problem because I can just put more water on here. And I can also lift it. So that's the demo. If anybody's having problems, remember you could find me during my office hours online on Mondays and Wednesdays. On Friday, you can call me on my cell phone or text me. And if you really need help, we can get on to a quick Zoom session if you need some visuals. All right, that's it.